Hello class, today we're going to be taking notes on the Anglo-Saxon and medieval periods as well as Beowulf. So the way this is going to work is I will record the notes as if I'm presenting them to you in class. You will listen to them during class and you can pause the video as need be to take the notes down in your notebook. So if you do have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask, but it's important that you take these notes so that when we start to read, there is no confusion on certain literary devices or topics that we're going to be discussing. So our learning objectives for today are I can analyze characteristics of epic poems and the techniques of Old English poetry, and I can present a dramatic passage with appropriate expression. Now, normally when we start a new unit of study, we talk about our essential questions. Essential questions are large questions that we can apply to a piece of literature, but we can also apply to the world around us. So the idea is that they are broad enough for us to analyze contextually with what we're reading and also contextually in terms of our own society and culture. Our first essential question is, what makes someone a hero? So this period of literature is early British literature. And as you read it, you can see how the idea of a hero changed over time. Anglo-Saxon warriors in Beowulf confront monsters who test their strength and courage. For King Arthur and his knights, which is a real person, the challenges were more complicated. These heroes pledged themselves to uphold a code of honor, but conflicting loyalties and human flaws sometimes got their way. So how do people become heroes then? Think about what we consider to be a hero in today's society. How would you define a hero? What are some examples of a hero? Go ahead and jot some of these ideas down in your notes. And again, feel free to pause to take anything down. For the essential questions, I would say that you should write the essential question and you can jot some ideas down for what you think, what makes someone a hero. Whatever you would like, whatever ideas come to your mind, I'll check these as part of your class participation. Our second essential question is, what is true chivalry? We will eventually wander off into the medieval period, and during this period, a code of honor was developed to govern behavior on the battlefield and in the court. This code of chivalry essentially presented an idealized view of brave, honest, loyal, and pious knights. They were expected to protect the weak, behave respectfully to women, and to go on holy quests. If you're looking for a modern example of this, you could say pretty much any large religious figure would follow the same rules, so to speak. Now, these people were expected to be perfect, much like we do our religious leaders. Do you think anyone can fully live up to such ideals? What can we gain from reading about chivalry? So these were very much everyday cultural norms at the time, but now we look at these people that say like, oh, I'm going to avoid watching movies until I'm 50 or whatever. I know that's an odd example, but it seems a little ridiculous. Is it possible to obtain such high standards for yourself? Our third essential question is, can we control our fate? Compared to most modern people, the Anglo-Saxons lived under very harsh conditions. They were constantly vulnerable to disease, natural disasters, and sudden acts of violence. The Anglo-Saxons believed that whatever good or bad happened to them was determined by fate. Do you think that people are generally in control of their lives, or does fate play an important role? How could a strong belief in fate affect a person's view of the future? All of us are people of the book. We're all religious people. And so this idea of fate might seem silly, like people don't believe in this. But do you think, the real question is not whether you believe in it or not for us, but do you think that it plays an important role in your life? Or can we control these things? This has been a question that people have debated for centuries. Even amongst people of the book, we tend to disagree. So what do you think? Can we control our fate? Or is it whatever will happen, will happen? In your notebook, go ahead and answer this question. What are your thoughts? There's no right or wrong answer. I just want you to explain what you think and why you think that. And again, feel free to pause the video so that you can write down the notes, write down your responses, etc. Our last essential question is, what happens when a society unravels? Medieval England had a social system called feudalism, which was supposed to maintain peace and stability, keywords being supposed to. However, civil war, popular uprisings, and deadly plagues often threatened the social order. What are the consequences to ordinary people when society starts to fall apart? So, if you want to think of this in a non-historical, slightly different light, think about the apocalypse that people, we always watch these TV shows about, right? What would happen if that actually, if zombies started taking over the world? What would happen to us ordinary people who aren't, super rich, can get a private jet to a private island real quick kind of people? It sounds silly, but I often think of this because I am somebody that does not have a ton of money by like apocalyptic standards. And I'm not in my own country. So if something were to happen, how do you get back? Do you get back? How do you survive? I don't have strong ties here. I have friends, but let's face it, if the world is ending, who are you going to save? Your family members or some Western person you met outside? All right, so we're going to transition ever so slightly. Those essential questions are ones that we will return to in the next two texts that we read. And now we're going to transition into notes specifically for the first text we're going to read, which is Beowulf. Beowulf is an epic poem, which is a long narrative poem that celebrates a hero's deeds. And traditionally, epic poems, or we can even call them epics, they were not written down because in the Anglo-Saxon society, which we're talking about, 600 around here, 680 to 1000 AD to 1066 really. The majority of people were illiterate, means they couldn't read or write. So the way that these poems were shared, that these ideas of heroes were shared, is through traditional speakers. They were told orally by mouth. And they weren't written down for centuries later, but some form of the stories were told to children. Think of the Disney fairy tales that your parents may have read to you as a child. They, in this time, would have heard the story of Beowulf because you recite stories in which you want your children to learn the core values or message from. Traditional epics, such as Beowulf, began as oral poems and were retold over many generations before they were finally written down. Literacy was not common until after even the Middle Ages, really. The Middle Ages and after the plague, I don't know if you know about the bubonic plague or the Black Death, but it was really that and a peasants' revolt that occurred that started this era of we're going to educate our people, we have a little bit more money. Because if you're really poor and you have to prioritize surviving and working in your garden so that you can survive, or learning how to read and write, you're going to work in the garden. Like, you're going to have your kids out working in your garden because that is what your survivalhood, depends on. So this is an epic poem, a long narrative poem that celebrates a hero's deeds. So based on that, what can you expect from what we're going to read? If you are thinking something along the lines of, it's going to be a story about a hero, you're correct. Epic poems share certain characteristics and conventions, and you need to know these characteristics and conventions. So they're written by a hero who is usually strong and courageous, a strong and courageous person of nobility. So somebody that is not only brave, but they're from kind of like a royal family, or they're from a wealthy family, like an aristocrat, right? Which isn't quite the king, but they're in the king's court. They usually involve supernatural creatures, great deeds, and perilous journeys. So kind of any superhero story you've ever heard of involves supernatural creatures. So these creatures can be, like dragons, for example, or the representation of a jinn, or an evil spirit, we would say. You say jinn, but we would say evil spirit. It imbues the hero with traits that reflect the ideals of the larger culture. So again, it's this idea of a bedtime story that teaches your children, what the ideal, what do you want them to be? So if the main character, if you want your kids to learn loyalty and courage, then you will have a hero who embodies these traits. They will be both loyal and courageous. They convey universal themes found in literature of all time periods, sorry about the typo, and cultures, such as good versus evil. Good versus evil is a very common theme in literature, and it's one that you'll find in a lot of epics. Because in a period where, we mentioned in the medieval period, for example, or even Anglo-Saxons, they never knew if they were going to be attacked and dead tomorrow, truthfully. The Vikings could come in and wipe their entire nation out. Or France could attack, or whatever. And so they were very scared about an afterlife and what was going to happen if we died tomorrow. Would we go to hell and be with Shaitan? Or, would we have an everlasting life in heaven, which I don't know the Arabic word for. So there's this underlying tone, truthfully speaking, of fear, and the one need to survive. And the last convention of an epic poem is that they often feature long speeches as well as formal diction in a serious tone. So diction is a word meaning word choice, and serious tone, like when you're being scolded by your parents and it's very serious, like, what are you doing? They weren't meant to be pleasurable experiences. They were in some instance because they were literally performed, but they weren't in the sense that you really were supposed to learn from these. Okay, the next we're going to talk about analyzing Old English poetry, but because of the recording platform that I'm using, I'm going to have you stop right here and then click to the second video that is posted in Google Classroom.